Chapter 1. Bwana would later argue that it was the Mustang that sucked them into it. Roger would protest initially and would then agree that maybe his friend had a point. The two men were in Los Angeles, having seen their girlfriends off at the airport after a satisfying vacation. The women were returning to New York, while Bwana and Roger stayed back. Their vacation wasn't over yet, not that they would admit as such. "It is work," Bwana would say earnestly whenever the topic came up. "We are retracing American history." That was partly the truth, but there was no denying that they were embarking on a second vacation, just the two of them, a driving one that would see them trace the California Trail. The trail once carried over 250,000 people across the country to seek the gold fields and farmlands of California. They intended to start from Coloma, specifically from Sutter's Mill, where gold had been first discovered, sparking off the California gold rush. From Coloma, they would backtrack to Mormon Station, Nevada, and the City of Rocks in Idaho. They would cover some of the starting points for the migrants in Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. They needed a vehicle, however. Not just any car, it had to be a 2007 Ford Mustang Shelby GT 500 model, 500 horsepower, V8 engine, red with white strips, assembled at Ford's Flat Rock factory. Roger had fallen in love with a Mustang when he had visited his hometown of Crown Butte. He had purchased one in the town, but that car had been damaged. He had insisted on another Mustang for this road trip, and once Bwana saw the car at a Los Angeles dealer, he agreed. The car spoke to them as it sat on its wheels, low and powerful, sleek and deadly. The dealer's salesman took one look at the two of them and decided to ditch his hard-sell approach. His visitors had an air about them that warned him to back off. His patience was rewarded when Bwana beckoned him with a look, and the negotiations began. An hour later, Roger donned his shades and drove the Mustang out of the dealer's lot. Their trip required more preparation, and they headed back to their hotel in Beverly Hills. Bwana and Roger had pulled out all the stops for the vacation. It wasn't often that they got to have vacations with their partners. For this one, they had booked 2 suites in the Beverly Hills Hyde, a secluded hotel in Beverly Hills. 15 acres of green and gardens, a small golf course, the hotel was an oasis away from the bustling city and was frequented by Hollywood stars and other celebrities. The Mustang felt right at home when Roger drove it up and handed the keys to the valet. "Lunch first," Bwana rumbled, rubbing his belly. That haggling took a lot out of me. Roger cast a withering look at his friend. "Doesn't show." "That's because I'm trained at disguise," Bwana huffed and headed in the direction of the lounge, the hotel's main restaurant. The dining room was large, tables covered in white cloth, silverware gleaming under chandeliers, and uniformed waiters moving swiftly as they served their guests. The manager led them to a table in a corner, bestowed a flashy smile, and hurried off to attend to other guests. Bwana perused the menu and shot off his order to a waiter without consulting Roger. He knew what his friend wanted, a rare ribeye steak. They were dining in silence when the room seemed to stir. A ripple that ran through the seated guests. They looked up to see the manager leading a slim man, blonde, in a white shirt and dark trousers, handsome visage, immaculate styling. Behind the man was a young boy who looked like he was 10 or 11 years old. Bringing up the rear was an older man, suited, a bland, almost contemptuous look on his face. Diners looked at the party discreetly and leaned forward to whisper among themselves. "He's someone?" Bwana asked his friend. "Not a clue. Might be an actor. They make movies in this town." "That right?" "Yeah. Movies are something you watch in a—" "I know what movies are," Bwana drew himself up. "I went to college." The suit came over to their table before Roger could retort. The manager several paces behind him. "You dudes aren't reporters, are you?" "Sorry?" Suit sighed. "The two of you. Are you reporters?" "Nope," Bwana replied shortly. "But what business is it of yours?" Suit looked at them as if they were from outer space. "Do you know who I am?" "Nope." "Do you know who my client is?" He shrugged an elegant shoulder in the direction of the man and boy, both of whom were studiously looking at their menus. "Nope." "He's Declan Fraser." He paused theatrically. Bwana looked at his friend and then around the room. He shook his head emphatically. "Room's still standing. I thought there would be some kind of explosion or at least music and stardust when you mentioned the name." Suit's lips thinned. "Declan is the hottest actor in the country. He doesn't like reporters around him. I hope you don't pester him for selfies or autographs." Roger put his knife and fork down and gestured at Suit, who bent closer. Roger whispered so loudly that nearby tables could hear him. "Can you tell this Declan dude not to pester us for selfies and autographs? We like our privacy." Suit's face turned red. Someone chuckled. "Rob!" There was a note of warning in Declan Fraser's voice when he called out. Suit glared at Bwana and Roger one last time, turned on his heel, and went to the actors' table. The manager came over to apologize, but Bwana waved him away. "We would like to dine uninterrupted, if that's possible," loud enough for the Fraser table to hear him. The manager nodded and turned away. From the corner of his eyes, Bwana saw Rob, the Suit, stiffen. He didn't look their way, however. "This town," Roger shook his head and dug into his steak. The two of them worked in a covert outfit, the Agency, that had its base in New York. The Black Ops unit went after terrorists, international criminal gangs, drugs and human traffickers, anyone who was a threat to national security. The Agency was headed by Claire, its director, who reported to only one person, the president. The outfit had 8 operatives: Zeb Carter, who was its lead agent, and Bwana, Roger, Broker, Bear, Chloe, and the Patterson twins, Beth and Megan, made up the rest. Zeb, Bwana, Roger, and Bear were former Special Forces operatives. Broker was an ex-ranger and ran the intelligence side of the Agency. Chloe was from the 82nd Airborne, while Beth and Megan came from a cop family. The twins were special. They ran the logistics side of the outfit and supported Broker in intelligence gathering and analysis. In truth, they did most of the work, while Broker practiced his golf swings. They were the youngest of the lot and brought an infectious energy and irreverent humor to the crew. They were the glue. The Agency was small, tight-knit, more like a family than a lethal team, which was partly why it hadn't failed in a single mission. "Heard from Zeb?" Roger downed his meal with a sip of wine and sighed in pleasure. They were in between. No active missions, and hence had managed to get away for their vacation. "Ah," Bwana chewed, spoke to him today. "Take your time," he said. "Nothing urgent back home, nothing burning." Nothing burned at their table until 3 men approached Declan Fraser an hour later. Rob had left by then, and Fraser and the boy had been dining, undisturbed. The 3 men brushed past the manager without caring for his protestations and came up to Fraser. The man in the front was in a tan suit, white shirt, and bright red tie. His black hair was slicked back and shone under the lights. His teeth were pearly white when he flashed a smile. It wasn't a friendly one. He pulled up a chair and seated himself, while the 2 men with him stood, their hands crossed in the front. "You're late, Fraser. We don't like people who are late." Tansuit spoke softly, yet Bwana and Roger could hear him. "You know the reasons, Danny. Equipment issues, studio rental problems. We will catch up." "That was what you said last time, Fraser. You didn't catch up." "Not here, Danny. We can discuss this in my office." "Later." Danny the tan suit stilled. Astonishment warred with anger. Anger won over. He leaned forward. "You are telling me to go away? Me? You son of a—" "Hey!" Fraser turned towards Bwana. Danny craned his head. The two men with him shifted. "There's a boy present. Not in front of him." Danny gawked. "Who are you?" "A diner. Who wants to eat in peace? Looks like that's impossible in this hotel." "Why don't you mind your business?" "I was. Until you raised your voice. I can't stick my fingers in my ears and eat. Not at the same time." Danny's gaze became a cold stare. "Buddy, you don't know who you are dealing with. I suggest you finish your dinner and leave. Better, just leave." "That sound like a threat to you?" Bwana asked his friend. "Did, to me." Roger still hadn't looked up from his steak. Bwana could handle whatever cropped up. "I don't like threats, Danny boy. Why don't you leave? Catch up with Mr. Fraser later?" A pin-drop silence. A knife rattled in a plate somewhere. The manager rushed over and whispered in Danny's ears. Danny flushed and rose jerkily, his eyes spitting fire at Bwana. His men gathered close to him and threw baleful looks at the insolent diner. Danny swung away and walked out without a backward glance, his security detail following close behind. Bwana rolled his eyes heavenwards and turned back to his dinner, which was uneventful from then on. They paid for their lunch, rose, and left without looking in Fraser's direction. "Let's go for a ride. We'll collect the Mustang from the parking lot," Roger suggested, and took the car keys from the valet. The Mustang was flanked by German-made cars and looked like it belonged. What didn't belong were the two men leaning against it. The two men who had accompanied Danny. Chapter 2. Bwana looked around him. There was no one else visible in the vast parking lot which was behind the hotel building. Guests rarely came that way, while valets came to park and return to the front. No one loitered to grab a smoke. "Looks like a welcoming committee." His eyes were fixed on the men who lounged, eyeing them lazily. "More like a disciplinary committee, to instill better manners in us," Roger drawled. "I like such committees." "Me too. It's been a long time since we cracked heads." "Thanks, folks," Roger called out cheerfully when they were close enough, "for polishing the car with your butts. It sure needed some soft attention." Bwana sniggered loudly, at which the men straightened. "You dudes need to learn some manners." The taller of them came forward, spitting out a toothpick from his mouth. He was hard-bodied, like his companion, strong shoulders, a gun outlined against his jacket. Both men were short-haired and had small eyes that watched Bwana and Roger closely. "You know who you were talking back to, back inside?" "Nope, and don't care. Now if you'll be kind enough to step out of the way." "Heard that, Chip. Jude's asking us to be kind." "Chip," the short man chuckled. "My mama didn't raise me to be kind. Dunno what it feels like." Roger was close enough to Tall Man to see the whites of his eyes. He didn't slow down or back up. He kept going forward and intruded in the man's personal space. Tall Man broke his stare, swiveled out of Roger's way, one hand reaching out to smash Roger's face on the Mustang's roof. The problem was, he didn't have enough room. He was crowded too close to the car. Roger caught the incoming wrist effortlessly and twisted until it bent over his back, and he yelled in agony. His shout caught in his throat when the side of a hand, as hard as concrete, chopped into his neck. Roger grabbed the attacker's gun, flung him away, and turned his attention to Chip. The short man was circling Bwana, jabbing at him carefully like a boxer. Bwana didn't retaliate. He kept ducking and weaving, the blows sailing past him harmlessly. "This is no kind of a workout," he complained when he caught his friend's eyes. "I thought these dudes would be better. Heck, they haven't even pulled out a gun or a knife." On cue, Chip grabbed at his gun and started drawing it out. Mistake, Bwana acted. He feinted as if going for the gun hand, and at the last moment turned the move into a slap. His full palm caught Chip flush on his face and rocked him on his heels. The short man wasn't done. His gun came out. Its short barrel started turning towards Bwana. Bwana grabbed his wrist and squeezed so hard that beads of sweat popped out on Chip's forehead. He yelled hoarsely and choked when Bwana's fist landed in his belly. Another fist landed on his neck and he collapsed. Bwana removed his gun and tossed him like a sack of flour onto the hard concrete of the parking lot. The sound of rushing feet made Bwana and Roger turn as one. Tall Man was rushing towards Roger, his face a mask of fury. He swung a haymaker that would have decapitated Roger if it had landed. Roger took the blow on his shoulder, his body braced for impact. Tall Man jarred with the shock of contact, started retreating, but found his hand was trapped. Roger kicked out with his legs, pivoted on a heel, using Tall Man's body weight to add momentum to his swing, and heaved him over his shoulder in a judo throw. Tall Man fell on Chip, and groans sounded in the air. Bwana and Roger removed the magazines from the guns and tossed them next to the fallen men. "Here's a free lesson for you." Bwana crouched next to Chip and grabbed his head by the hair. "Don't attack strangers. You don't know who you might come up against." He slammed Chip's head onto concrete and rose. Roger smacked the wheel a little while later as he drove out of the parking lot. Bwana and he had decided to go for a ride to get some fresh air. "We plain forgot to ask them who they were, who Danny Boy was." Bwana didn't reply. He was staring past Roger through the left window. Roger followed his gaze and spotted the reason for his friend's silence. "That's the same." "Yeah, the kid with Fraser." The boy was watching them from the edge of the parking lot. He didn't speak or wave, just stared at them with wide eyes. He grew smaller in the mirror and disappeared when Roger swung to the front of the hotel. There was a line of cars at the exit, and he slowed. A figure flashed in front of them and came to Roger's window. The valet, a young man in a red uniform. Roger lowered his window at his smile. "Heard you got into a ruckus inside, sir." "We exchanged words politely with some Danny," Roger replied. He didn't mention the fight in the parking lot. The valet's smile vanished. "You know who he is?" "Nope." "Enlighten us." "That was Danny Trevisani." Roger shrugged. "Doesn't mean anything to us." "It should. His father, Giovanni Trevisani, is said to be a Mafia boss, the most powerful one on the West Coast." "You think we should be worried?" Roger asked after a while as he swung onto Sunset Strip and joined the river of office commuters and tourist buses. "Nah," Bwana replied after a while, distracted by a bare-chested kid who was rollerblading, serving soda and soft drinks from a tray around his chest to the slow-moving vehicles. "Only in Hollywood. Mafia's ancient. They're losing their grip. I don't know what they have on Fraser, but it's not our problem. Not something we should lose sleep over." "Still," Roger persisted, "worth taking some precautions?" "Yeah." Roger accelerated, barely flicking a glance at the strip that was coming alive, now that dusk was falling. Billboards and neon lit up and painted the evening in orange, pink, white, and yellow hues. The Strip was a mile-and-a-half section of Sunset Boulevard and was home to numerous nightclubs, boutiques, and entertainment venues. Roger navigated onto Santa Monica Boulevard and headed to West Hollywood, where he drove into the parking lot of an industrial unit. They went to a set of storage lockers that were rented out, and both drew out duffel bags. The bags were heavy and clinked softly when they dumped them in the rear of the Mustang and headed back. Dinner was quiet, just the two of them in another corner in a different restaurant in the hotel. They made plans for their road trip, and it was while they were arguing over their choices of wine that they had visitors. Rob, the suit who had asked them if they were reporters, settled in a chair opposite them. By his side was the boy. "Here we go again," Bwana mumbled, loud enough for Rob to hear. Their visitor flashed pearly teeth and held his hand out. "Rob Webb." "We started on the wrong foot. I'm Declan Fraser's agent and manager. I have been with him ever since he broke through with his hit movie 10 years back." Bwana and Roger exchanged a look only they could read. "Let's hear him out," it said. They shook his hand and settled back to listen. "This is Shannon, Declan's boy. He saw something in the parking lot, which is why we are here." Webb took his time, turning on the charm, talking about the industry, dropping names effortlessly, showing why he was agent to one of the most sought-after actors in the industry. "I looked you folks up. You're New Yorkers, right? Work in a security consulting firm, here on vacation." He held a hand up when he read Bwana's expression. "Money talks, Mr. Kayembe, especially in this town. I can find out pretty much anything about anyone if I know whom to ask and how much to pay for it." "Both of you have an army background, special forces. Shannon said you took those two hitters with ease. You know who they were?" "We know," Roger replied shortly. "See?" Webb smiled at Shannon. "I told you they'd check out who those men were." "I want to hire you. As you might have suspected, Declan's got a small problem with Danny, nothing major, and it's already under control. But I want you to be with Declan and Shannon, 24 hours till this thing blows away." "Like a protection detail? Bodyguards?" Roger kept his tone even. "Exactly," Webb snapped his fingers. "It'll be a message to Danny." "Back off. Hey, I can even get you small roles in movies. You both look the part. Menacing." "How do we look?" "Like Heavies, Chapter 3. "No?" Roger picked up the menu and perused it, but Webb didn't take the hint. "What do you have to lose? You make good money for standing around and looking like you do. You get a nice part in a Hollywood blockbuster, which I can arrange. You'll get all the female company you want." "No," Bwana echoed his friend. Webb dropped his hail fellow well-met routine. "This is about the money? Name your price." "Webb, this isn't about the money. We don't want a movie part. We don't want female company," Bwana told him wearily. Webb looked at them in disbelief. "Man, you sure you guys are from this planet? Ain't no one who'll turn down the opportunity to hang around with Declan Fraser or act in a movie. You just met two of them. It's not like I can't get anyone else." "You should." The skin around Webb's eyes tightened, and his green eyes turned mean. "You're making a mistake." "It won't be the first time. Now, can you leave us alone?" The boy rose and tugged at Webb's elbow. "Rob, let's go." Webb didn't move. He sat there giving Roger and Bwana the evil eye. He was a big Hollywood agent. He represented the highest-paid actors in the country. Every director and actor knew him. They clamored for him to represent them. Despite all that, there sat two men who were singularly unconcerned about his fame and power. He rose stiffly when the boy jerked his arm again and turned away without a word. "What a drama queen," Roger spoke softly when their visitors left. Bwana poured hefty shots of wine in their glasses, toasted his friend silently, and drank. Hollywood. The circus never ended. They were in the hallway, approaching their suites, when Shannon Fraser came from behind them. It looked like he had been waiting for them, concealed by one of the white columns that lined the hallway. "Mr. Kayembe, Mr. Fearden, can I have a word with you?" Roger whirled around. The boy had come up so silently that they hadn't heard him. He checked the corridor. No one else around. No Webb. "I don't think there's much to talk about, Mr. Fraser." He eyed the boy curiously. "You should know the full story, sir. And then you can decide." Sir Bwana and Roger exchanged a glance. It was rare to hear that word from young boys. "We've already decided. You heard us." This won't take more than a few minutes, sir. Bwana moved before Roger could reply. He opened the door to his suite and stood aside. An invitation. Roger sighed inwardly. Bwana. He always had a soft spot. The Mafia has their hooks in my dad. The boy launched his story when they were settled inside. Neither Roger nor Bwana reacted. They had suspected something like that. They have invested in my dad's movie and want him to complete it quickly. They are hassling him every day on the set. Surely the director and the studio can handle that. No, the director is owned by the Mafia. There's no studio. It's an indie movie. Mr. Fraser, we are not bodyguards. We don't do this. If you wish, we can recommend several good people to you. I saw you in the parking lot. Webb checked you out. He said you have very good references. I want you, not anyone else. This is your idea, not Webb's, not your father's? Roger asked incredulously. Yes, sir, because the Mafia put pressure on my dad by coming after me. They have roughed me up several times. They met Declan Fraser in a suite in the Beverly Wilshire Hotel the next day, just him and his son in the penthouse suite that had a spectacular view of the city. The actor was in a red shirt over blue jeans, a gleaming leather belt cinched around his waist that looked like its cost could have fed an entire village in some parts of the world. His dark eyes were clear but troubled as he considered his guests lounging on a couch. If Roger and Bwana were overawed by his presence, it didn't show. You shouldn't have bothered them. Fraser broke the silence and addressed his son. You weren't doing anything. I decided to take matters in my own hands. Shannon jutted his chin out mutinously. Mr. Fraser, Bwana broke in impatiently, can we know what's going on? Declan Fraser seated himself, crossed a leg, and began. He had been delivering hits year after year. There wasn't anything he hadn't achieved Hollywood-wise. He had an Oscar, top billing. He had lost his wife, Shannon's mom, 5 years back, and had raised his son on his own. That had endeared him even more to his fans. One of the most famous men in the country, doing it all alone. And then it started to go wrong. The train didn't derail, it slowed. The hits became fewer. Some movies turned out to be outright stinkers. He got fewer offers. It didn't matter so much because he had made his money and could have lived comfortably without acting again. However, there was one box that he hadn't ticked in his career: act in an indie movie. He got Webb to check out scripts. He was prepared to put in money if necessary. Webb found Trey Mankins. Mankins was an upcoming director whose movies had made waves at various film festivals. He had a script that seemed to be written for Fraser. It was about a man who was past his peak and falling fast. It was about how he dealt with failure and his personal demons. It was intense. It was dramatic, and Fraser loved it. He met Mankins and liked what he saw. He signed up without any of his customary due diligence. He put in his own funds, $20 million, and Mankins raised the rest. They started shooting, and then Fraser discovered Mankins had raised funds from the Mafia. He didn't know it at the time, and when he did, it was too late. A lot of the money had been spent, and shooting was well underway. I thought they were no longer in Hollywood. That was in the past. Why would they invest in an indie anyway? Roger frowned. I am getting to that. Fraser ran his fingers through his hair, rose, and paced. You're right. The Mafia used to have a strong hold over Hollywood at one time. Not anymore, but they're still there. They are like any other business. They invest in movies. They get their returns. Things get ugly when they make unusual demands, like the sex scenes in my movie. There was no sex when Mankins outlined his script to me. Now there are a few scenes. Mankins pushed back. I did the same. Danny Trevisani appeared, roughed up Mankins in front of me. I intervened. His men slapped me. His voice was a monotone, no expression on his face. You didn't go to the cops, Mr. Fraser. Both Mankins and I threatened them with just that. What happened? They roughed his mom up. He lives with her. She's elderly. He took a long breath, his face flat and hard when he faced his guests. They came to my house that evening. 2 men held me, while 1 man slapped Shannon repeatedly until he lost consciousness. That was Danny's warning. Go to the cops and Mankins' mom and my son would die. The penthouse was silent when he stopped, just his breathing and Shannon's stirring on the couch. What's the situation now? Bwana asked. We have come to an agreement with Danny. We'll complete the movie with the scenes he wants. He backs off. That's the last we see of him. So why do you need us? He still barges in on set, makes out as if he owns us. There are times he has dropped in at home and slapped Shannon, just to show who's in charge. Your presence will stop him. It's just 1 week, Mr. Kayembe. Declan Fraser seemed to be pleading, 1 week for shooting to finish. That's all I ask of you both. What happens after a week? Mankins and I watched the entire movie, the raw footage. I insist on some of the scenes getting cut. Make sure the digital prints are destroyed. Why? Fraser hesitated and shot a look at his son who didn't budge from his position. He paced again, agitation in his body. Trevisani's gang, they have an online business. They release uncut videos of Hollywood stars. Some of those scenes we shot, they were more than explicit. I wouldn't want them to be out there. The actress, she's young and just starting out. It'll destroy her. They take that raw footage and sell it online. Porn. Bwana knew what Roger was thinking of. They had worked together for so long that they could often read each other's minds. We need to have a meeting, Bwana said finally. With whom? With Danny Trevisani. Chapter 4. Shannon Fraser went to an exclusive private school in Malibu, along with several offspring of the rich and the famous. The school had a large campus, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and its own security. Bwana and Roger interviewed the security chief at the school, who turned out to be former Army. He had served about the same time they had. A brief discussion turned into a long one as they discovered mutual friends and shared experiences. School security is good, Bwana grunted as they stood aside to let her rolls through the gates. Roger barely glanced at the sleek vehicle. Rolls-Royce? It wasn't a Mustang, was it? He'll be okay in the school. We'll be with him, before and after. They had worked out a schedule with Fraser. They would spend their waking hours either with Shannon or Declan or both, depending on who was in school or the studio. If Shannon was at school, they'd go to the studio and return in the evening to pick up the boy. The studio that Mankins had rented had a security detail, ex-cops, competent and professional. It's not like we need to do anything. Just hang around and look tough, Bwana complained as the second day dragged on. Looking tough is work. Roger flexed his jaw and offered his profile to a bunch of giggling schoolgirls as they walked past, outside the school. Not for me. I look tough in my sleep. They met Danny Trevisani in the afternoon that same day. Bwana and Roger were in the studio, hanging around, looking as inconspicuous as they could. Trey Mankins was tall and gangly, pimply-faced, and black hair falling over his face. He had a habit of speaking slowly and didn't make eye contact. He didn't give the impression of being an up-and-coming director. He changed personality when he was behind the camera. He became crisp and directed his shots with authority. Bwana and Roger watched as Declan Fraser went through his scenes effortlessly, hardly needing any retakes. The movie was Jennifer Miranda's big break, and Declan took his time with her, making her feel comfortable, helping her in her scenes. It was obvious why Fraser was one of the most respected actors in the business. It wasn't just his skills. He had empathy and hadn't allowed his fame to affect that. Danny Trevisani barged into the studio as if he owned it. He didn't. Roger had checked that out. The mobster arrived with a retinue of 4 men, two of whom were the same men at the hotel. He cracked jokes and laughed loudly as he watched. He stared at Miranda openly and sized her up in her clingy dress. During a break in the shooting, he approached the actors and laid his hand on Miranda's shoulder. She squirmed uncomfortably for a moment, and Roger could see her face flush. "No," Bwana mouthed at him. "Let them sort it out themselves." Fraser sorted it out smoothly. He said something to the gangster, flashed a smile, and led the actress away to her changing room. He returned, mopping his face with a towel, and stood next to Mankins, who seemed to be discussing the shooting schedule with Trevisani. "Just a day behind. We'll catch up," they heard the director say. "You'd better. Every day late is costing us." Trevisani looked mean and tough. The next scene began and required Fraser and Miranda to get passionate. One of Trevisani's men made a crude joke that was audible to all and made the actress jerk away from Fraser's clinch. Mankins called for another retake, another comment, this time louder. Fraser and Miranda broke away and talked to each other softly. Mankins approached them, and after several head nods, he went to Trevisani. Bwana and Roger were too far to hear what the director said, but it looked like he was requesting for quiet. "It's my money. My people can say what they want. She got a problem flashing her." "Danny boy," Roger strode across the floor, "your mama didn't teach you manners?" Danny Trevisani froze. He stared at Roger in disbelief, and then at Bwana, for whom looking menacing did come naturally. "You?" Trevisani shrieked. "How did you get here?" "Declan Fraser hired us to make sure the shooting was uninterrupted, and he wasn't troubled. There were around 20 people in the studio, the actors, Mankins, grips, a few spectators who had paid to watch Fraser and Mankins shoot. Why don't you leave? We'll come and see you in the evening, establish some ground rules." Fraser's men moved forward threateningly. One of them reached underneath his jacket. "Here?" Roger quirked an eyebrow. "In front of everyone? Danny boy, you're going to go heavy with witnesses present?" Trevisani's face shuttered. His eyes turned cold. He made a gesture with his hands, and his men fell back. "In the evening. Let's discuss this." He clipped out tightly and turned around and left. The rest of the shooting was uneventful, and when Mankins wrapped up for the day, Fraser joined them. He wiped sweat from his face and nodded gratefully when a studio boy gave him a drink. "Thanks. Jennifer says she's obliged. I'll come along with you. We'll take Shannon too when you meet Trevisani." He pulled deeply on the straw and swallowed. "You think it'll get rough?" "No, he's a businessman after all." Bwana watched the grips pack up, putting away their equipment neatly. It might be an indie movie, but Mankins had hired good people and equipment. "What if it does?" "We'll see." Bwana cut off the discussion. He hoped Trevisani would be reasonable, but if he wasn't, that's what he and Roger were for. Danny Trevisani's office was above a warehouse in Compton. It was a low-slung concrete building with a few tired-looking palms swaying in the wind. Opposite the warehouse were a few containers in a field, fenced off. One of them belched smoke, a generator. There were more gated buildings on the other side of the street, industrial-looking, and a line of vehicles parked on either side of the street. It was hot in the evening. LA hot that made sweat stream down faces. The light breeze did little to offer any respite. A few heads turned when Roger drove Fraser's Mercedes Maybach through the street. Black, sleek and long, it was German engineering at its finest and stood out in the street. They had collected Shannon from school, who now bounced in the rear, playing a game on his cell. Bwana covered the actor and his son when they alighted, and Roger led the way. Past rows of forklifts and men piling crates and boxes in the open mouths of waiting trucks. Up a flight of concrete stairs to a strip of offices. No one paid much attention to the actor, who had his head down. his shades on his face, his hand gripping his son's. Trevisani was in a large office behind a reception area. His feet were on the desk, and he was twirling a keyring on a finger, speaking on his cell, when Roger entered. He pointed at chairs, and they waited for the mobster to hang up. Trevisani didn't. It looked like he was threatening someone who was late on some payments. His voice was venomous, and he was promising to reconstruct the speaker's face, when Roger felt movement behind him. The four heavies from the studio entered and lined up behind them. Two of them wore buzz cuts, two had longer hair. All of them wore suits, but their muscled bodies were apparent. All of them had thick, stubby fingers. They looked competent at their work. "So," Trevisani swung his feet off the desk and tossed his cell at a flunky, "what arrangement do you want to discuss?" "You back off troubling Mankins and Fraser. You don't tell them to add more sex scenes. Or how you want those scenes to be. Let them finish shooting the movie. Once that's done, the product's out. Distribution takes over. You have nothing to do with any of them again." "How am I troubling them?" Trevisani looked behind Roger. "Carlos, am I troubling them?" "No, boss." "See? I just come to watch the shooting. After all, I've got an investment in it. I need to keep an eye on how it's progressing." "Mr. Trevisani," Roger strove to adopt a polite tone, "you don't know anything about making movies. You go there to watch Miss Miranda, and to throw your weight around. Show how big you are. It's not necessary. Everyone knows you are a top Mafia man. You leave them alone. They'll finish the job quicker." Trevisani spun a paperweight on his desk. "Just who are you guys? Just because you beat two of my men, you think you're special? Do you know how powerful I am? How much reach I have? I have controlled myself till now, but—" Bwana leaned forward and stopped the revolving paperweight. "Danny boy." His voice was soft, almost gentle. "We are special. Don't push us." Trevisani clashed eyes with Bwana. No one moved. Utter silence in the room until Trevisani relaxed and leaned back in his chair. "No one touches the boy. Fraser could have gone to the cops. We could have, but we didn't," Bwana continued. "The boy is off limits. So is the studio, Mr. Mankins, Miss Miranda, all of them. You don't tell the director or the actors anything. You don't influence the script. You back off. Mind your business. Let the movie people do their jobs. And if I don't, then my friend and I will bring your house down on you." And with that, Bwana sucked all oxygen out of the room. A nerve near Trevisani's right eye jumped. His lips twisted in a lazy smile. He held up a hand to stop his heavies, who were moving ominously. "Just the two of you? Against the Mafia?" "Two are enough, Danny boy. More than enough. Does your father know about all this?" Megan had sent Bwana and Roger all details on Danny and Giovanni Trevisani. The father was in his 70s, but still ran the gang like a tight ship. There were rumors that he didn't approve of his son's hot-headed ways, and that played into Bwana's hands. Danny Trevisani's smile disappeared. Something dark appeared in his eyes and went away just as quickly. "We have a deal," he said thickly. He didn't rise when his visitors rose. He didn't shake hands. "You're special, huh?" he called out, when Roger, the last to leave, was halfway out of the door. Roger turned his head to look at him and saw an animal-like expression on Trevisani's face. "We'll have to see how special you are." Chapter 5. "What did he mean by that?" Fraser craned his head to look behind him as Roger drove out of the street. "Just mouthing off." Roger dismissed the threat. He didn't point out the pair of headlights trailing behind them. From Bwana's imperceptible tightening, he knew his friend had spotted the followers in the side mirror. "That went well, I think," the relieved actor continued. "For a moment I thought his men would attack us. There was no mileage in that for him. You were present. You could have been injured, and that could have affected his product. He's interested in the movie and in selling those scenes, which we aim to edit out. What he does with the edited scenes is his business, Fraser replied grimly. Could you have taken all 4 of them if they had attacked? Shannon asked doubtfully. Sure. Don't mistake size and numbers for strength. Those men are used to fighting when the odds are with them. Very few of them have been in war zones. And you have been. For Bwana, every place is a war zone, Roger deflected, before the boy became more inquisitive. Their past and their missions weren't for public consumption. It took them an hour to wend their way through the evening traffic, their ride drawing attention wherever they went. A couple of bikers followed them for a while and tried to peer through the darkened windows whenever they came alongside. One of them flashed his camera, hoping in vain that it would capture a celebrity. That's the price you pay, Fraser murmured, leaned back, and closed his eyes. Roger thought about giving his followers the slip, but rejected the idea. There seemed to be 2 men in the black SUV, keeping several car lengths behind. They didn't make any effort to conceal themselves and hung onto their tail at every turn and every light. Trevisani will just order more watchers. Let them be. It's not as if they don't know where Fraser lives, or where Bwana and I are holed up. He caught Bwana's eye in the mirror and suppressed a smile. He could read his friend's expression. Bwana was impatient, was wanting to face the followers. He'll get his chance. Declan Fraser's house was on a bluff, high above in Beverly Hills. It was surrounded by a tall, white concrete gate. It had security guards who checked them and let them in. 5 acres of splendid isolation, cut off from the heat and dust of the city. A swimming pool shimmered, and attendants hurried as Roger rolled up in the driveway. How many staff do you have here? Roger asked the actor, who climbed out before answering. 20 at all times. 8 of them are security. I have a head of security who lives on the site in separate accommodation. He pointed to the back of the house. The actor led them inside to a tennis court-sized lounge, marble and chandeliers, Turkish carpets and couches. An attendant brought a tray with various drinks on it. Roger and Bwana declined the offer and accompanied the actor as he took them on a tour of the house. It had 8 bedrooms and as many bathrooms, winding stairs to the bedrooms, a cinema, several studies, an office for the actor and a smaller office for his son, a large kitchen and a banquet-sized dining room, a smaller, more intimate dining room, storage rooms, a security control room which they studied in greater detail. They went to the rear lawns, which had a fish pond and well-maintained gardens. Fraser led them to a bungalow from which a dark-skinned man emerged. He was the same height as Roger, but more powerfully built. Short hair, clean-shaven, dark eyes that sized them quickly, a gun holstered to his hip. Chad, this is Bwana and Roger. I mentioned them to you, Fraser introduced them. Chad Reynolds, my head of security at the house. Reynolds turned out to be ex-Rangers, and he had heard of Broker. That helped break the ice. He was competent, and when he outlined the various security measures and protection detail, Bwana and Roger relaxed. The actor and his son were in safe hands when at home, and their chauffeurs turned out to be part of the protection detail, former Secret Service men. They too were highly competent. It's just Trevisani we need to worry about. Roger went to their Mustang, which was parked alongside several other vehicles to the side of the main house. I am not worried. I am looking forward to it. Bwana eased himself inside the car, and it lowered an inch on its shocks. They came across Trevisani's men as they came down the hills on a narrow road. Just them, with the lights of the city to their right, off a steep cliff. And then, as they turned a corner, the SUV was parked crossways, blocking all traffic. Its 2 occupants were leaning against its side, their arms crossed, looking confident. They had guns visible on their hips, their hands were empty. 30 feet separated them when from behind, another SUV approached, coming close to them, a head poked out, grinning widely. Trevisani's men? Roger adjusted his mirror. We have to assume. I think I can see 3 bodies. Bwana twisted in his seat, including that punk who has stuck his head out. Could be more. My Mustang will be ruined, Roger complained. We'll make them pay for it. Roger kept going, not letting off the gas, keeping his speed steady. 30 feet became 20, and then 10. Alarm flickered on the 2 hoods' faces at the front, and when Roger was scant feet away, they dove desperately. One to their left, the other to their right. To the right were trees, and beyond it, the cliff. Bwana and Roger leapt out just before the Mustang crashed into the SUV, metal screaming and engine revving up. Tires burned on the road, and the smell of rubber and gas filled the air. Roger wasn't paying any attention to the crash. He landed on his left shoulder, rolling with the impact. His right hand darted to beneath his jacket on his first roll. His head hit a stone on the second roll, dazing him, but that didn't stop him from drawing out his gun. On the third roll, he fired a long burst at the SUV at the back from which 2 men had emerged. One was the driver, the other was a gangster, from the passenger door. The driver was holding what looked like a Mossberg, grasping it lightly, totally unprepared for the rounds from Roger. Unready for the burst of hostile fire, the hoods figured they had the situation in control. After all, they had numbers on their side. Roger proved them wrong. His first shot was at the driver, who dove back into the vehicle. Don't know if I hit him. The second hitter had his door open, and he used it as cover to return fire at Roger, his shots spitting into dust, inching closer as he found his aim and started correcting. Take your time, Roger told himself. His forehead was bleeding from the impact with the stone. From the other side of the vehicles, he heard guns crashing. Bwana, ignore him. Somewhere behind him would be the man who had dove out of the way. Gunman is immediate threat. He peered in the darkness and thought he saw 2 dark blobs under the open door of the SUV. Gravel hit his face as a round came close. He lowered the Glock, his gun hand a straight line, and fired at the first blob and immediately at the second. A groan sounded, and the hitter stopped shooting as his legs gave out from beneath him. Fast reload, another long burst at the SUV's windscreen. His Glock had armor-piercing rounds. They made short work of the glass, and it splintered and shattered, and splotches of red filled it. Roger was moving, even as his friends shouted, "Cover!" He kicked off with his legs to the side of the road, hugging the cliff, turning into a tight ball, just as the grenade Bwana had tossed exploded. It reduced the SUV across the road to a burning husk. Not the time to watch the spectacle. He rose, Glock ready, and raced back to the SUV at the rear. A shadow at the other side of the Mustang, Bwana, mimicking his moves. The SUV trembled as if someone moved inside. "Come out! Hands raised!" No response from inside the vehicle. Roger and Bwana poured lead through the broken windscreen. "Stop!" a voice called out hoarsely. "Throw out your gun! Any weapon! If you have a weapon, we'll finish you!" A carbine fell out of the door. A Smith & Wesson followed, and then a knife. A man stumbled out, his hands raised high, his eyes scrunched, looking wildly at the burning wreck of the other SUV. Roger recognized him. He was one of the 4 from Trevisani's office. "Any more?" No, you killed Chip. Tony can't walk. Don't kill me, please." "Ask Tony to crawl out." Tony, the hood whose legs Roger had shot, crawled out, whimpering softly. There were 2 men in the burning SUV. Roger addressed his friend without looking at him. "Taken care of. One of them was coming at you from behind. I persuaded him it wasn't a good move. The one on my side, he's somewhere below. Deep, down, below. I threw him off the cliff." "Any more?" The grenade took care of them. Roger went forward and cuffed the injured men. He checked the SUV. No more hostiles. The driver, Chip, was dead. He went to the SUV at the front and found Carlos, the man Bwana had dissuaded. Bwana's methods of persuasion were 3 rounds, one in his right shoulder, one in his left, and the third in his thigh. Carlos swore and tried to dive for his gun, which was lying several feet away. Roger caught him roughly and secured his hands with plastic ties, ignoring the scream that burst from him. There were no more bodies in the destroyed vehicle. 5 hitters, 2 dead, 3 injured, not bad. Bwana holstered his gun in satisfaction. And 1 ruined Mustang, Roger said morosely and kicked Carlos in the butt. Chapter 6. You used a grenade in Beverly Hills? The speaker was as dark as coal and as broadly built as an Abrams tank. His face was suffused in rage as he bellowed at Roger and Bwana in his office. LAPD Chief of Police. Jeffrey Hall was huge. He was as tall as Bwana, 6 feet 4 inches, but wider. Massive shoulders and muscled biceps and forearms that could lift the rear end of a small car. He wasn't happy, and he had already torn the head off a subordinate, who had the temerity to enter his office without knocking. Hall knew the 2 men in his office. He knew all the agency operatives. Zeb and he went back several years, shared missions in distant and dangerous lands. None of that mattered. He would rip into anyone who disturbed the peace in his city with the force of a pile driver. Bwana and Roger were bearing the brunt of that pile driver. Traffic had lined up safely behind the SUV as they had been taking down their attackers. A concerned citizen had made a call to Hall that there was a gun battle raging in Beverly Hills that had brought out the LAPD in force. SWAT teams and choppers had swung into action, and Bwana and Roger had been surrounded. A furious Hall had arrived at the scene, and upon seeing who was responsible for the demolition jobs, had personally cuffed the 2 men. They were first chewed out by a Detective Kaminsky, a young and upcoming officer who drove them to the LAPD headquarters in his cruiser. "Chief will throw the book at you, and you deserve it." He eyed them in his mirror. Kaminsky looked like he was in his late 30s, but his face was young and unlined. "You know, I have seen Fraser up close," he boasted. "So?" Roger asked disinterestedly. "He suffers from depression. He attempted suicide. I was the first cop on scene. The only cop, actually, responding to a 911 from his son. He was conscious enough to ask me to hush it up. Only Chief Hall and I know." "You killed 2 men, injured 3, Hall yelled. "You thought this was Iraq or Syria. Did it occur to you to call us?" "No time, Chief." Roger tried to look contrite. They were on first-name terms, and the Chief of Police was a good friend. However, now wasn't the time to call on that friendship. He knew Hall had taken heat from several of the rich and the famous of Hollywood. Those good folks liked to portray action on screen. They didn't like it if violence was perpetrated on their streets. "You had time to explode a grenade." Veins stood out thickly on Hall's neck as he slapped a baseball glove-sized palm on his desk. The report sounded like a gunshot. There was the sound of running feet, and 2 cops burst through the door. They retreated quickly when Hall pointed a stubby finger at them. "What did you want us to do, Chief?" Bwana attempted reasonable. "Let those guys perforate us?" "It would have been better if they had. Have you seen the headlines? The TV channels? Vigilantes in Hollywood? That's what the media are calling it." "I quite like that," Roger preened. "You think we'll land a movie deal, Chief?" "You speak one more word," Hall said ominously, "and I'll rise up from here and whip your ass." Roger's jaw dropped. He stared at Hall for several moments before he recovered. "That sounds like trash talk." It sure was, Bwana agreed. Who would have thought Chief of Police Jeffrey Hall could trash talk with the best of them? Hall glared at them, and if eyes could burn, Bwana and Roger would have been toast. His visitors looked unrepentant. Halls kept on glaring till his lips twitched and a chuckle escaped him. The chuckle turned into a deep belly laugh, the sound echoing in his office. Zeb called when he heard the news. He said I should lock the two of you up. What exactly went down? He asked when he had calmed down. Roger walked him through the attack and explained how they were protecting Fraser and his son. Why were these guys after you? Hall frowned. Is Fraser involved in some way? And you guys aren't into close protection. Why are you guys doing this gig? Nope, this has nothing to do with the actor, Roger lied smoothly. Declan Fraser had explicitly asked them not to mention Trevisani's threats to anyone, including the cops. Bwana and Roger didn't agree with him, but it was the actor's decision. He had a right to feel paranoid when his son had been threatened by the Mafia. They picked on us at the Beverly Hills Hide, interfered with our dinner. We had a polite conversation with them, showed them the error of their ways. Fraser was dining with his son. They witnessed everything. Later that evening, Fraser offered us the job, his personal security detail until he finishes shooting. Why? Is he in some kind of trouble? We asked him, Chief, Bwana rumbled. He said it would look good. Add mystery to the movie. Would improve box office collections on opening day. Actors, he concluded, as if that explained everything. Hall looked unconvinced and asked several questions for which Bwana and Roger had ready answers. Hall surrendered finally and escorted them out of his office. You have made dangerous enemies. Danny Trevisani is bad, but his father, Giovanni Trevisani, he's a shark. It's best you drop this gig and get out of town. We'll think about it, Chief. Fraser's agent promised us movie roles. If we snag those, we might be here a long time. Roger smiled widely. Get out of here, Hall growled and shoved them out of the door. Roger flagged a cab and gave the driver Declan Fraser's address. They sat in silence, Bwana leaning back with his eyes shut. Hall let us off easily. He bought into our story readily. I wonder why. Maybe he's a fan of Fraser's. Bwana snorted and changed the topic. He's right in one respect. Danny boy will not let this rest. I have been thinking about that, Roger declared. Thinking doesn't hurt? Maybe we should be decisive, Roger ignored the barbed comment. Be a little proactive. Like what? A demonstration. They reassured Fraser and his son that they were fine. Gave a very brief outline of how they had survived and didn't go into any detail when Shannon wanted to know about the grenade. Danny called when you were with the LAPD. Declan Fraser spoke quietly when his son had gone to bed. There were circles under his eyes, and fatigue was etched on his face. He threatened to kill Shannon if you mentioned anything to the cops. We didn't, Roger reassured him. We guessed he would call you. He had a message for you. You will not leave this city alive. He looked searchingly at the two men, trying to read into their impassive expressions. Mr. Fraser, Bwana's voice was deep and comforting. Many people have tried to kill us. People worse than Danny Trevisani. We are still here. Our agreement still remains. We will be with you until you complete your shoot. Thank you. The actor's shoulders sagged in relief. I have something for you. He took them to the side of the house and pointed to a car that was shining under the lights. Roger's jaw dropped for the second time that night. A Mustang? Shannon insisted that it was the least I could do. It's the same exact model as your previous one. But Roger trailed off, thinking about the effort involved in locating the vehicle, buying it outright, and having it delivered in the few hours they had been away. Fame has its benefits, Declan Fraser flashed his megawatt smile. The demonstration they arranged was in Wilmington, a Los Angeles neighborhood known for higher than average crime statistics in the city. It was heavily industrialized due to the proximity of the port of Los Angeles. The third largest oil field in the country was in Wilmington, which added to the concentration of industries. Bwana and Roger were neither interested in the port nor the oil. They were intent on adding to the crime statistics of the neighborhood. They drove down East Anaheim Street the next day in the morning, past a set of lights, squat buildings flashing past them on either side. Restaurants, auto restorers, a few boarded-up storefronts, small offices. They were interested in a two-story building next to a chemist. It was painted cream, weather, and sun, taking its toll on the color, and had iron grills mounted on its windows. Roger pointed to the security camera mounted on its gate as they drove past. The Trevisani family owned the building, and it was long suspected to be the center of the video ring. LAPD had busted the premises several times, but had come away empty-handed each time. All they found was a video production unit. However, there were rumors, and in the darknet, Megan had identified a few discussion threads that mentioned the building. "They don't host the video clips from there," she had briefed her friends the previous night. "That is done in East European countries where we don't have access or jurisdiction. What happens in that building is collection and distribution. They bring together all the video clips they have stolen or acquired by other means, and those get sent to other hosting sites, all done electronically." "No actor or studio took action against it?" Roger queried. "Why do you think the cops raided the building, doofus?" she exclaimed impatiently. They watched the building all day, after exchanging their Mustang for a rented Chrysler, black with dark windows. They parked behind a line of cars and watched. The building seemed to have 7 staff, all of them male. 3 of them appeared to be middle-aged and had the look of heavies about them. Bwana sent their photographs to Megan, who confirmed an hour later that those were indeed heavies in the Trevisani family. 2 of them have records and have served time, she warned them. They went in at night, Chapter 7. Night, after 2 a.m., was when alertness levels dropped and when the body felt sluggish. It was when Bwana leapt over the iron gate, Roger following him. They were dressed in black and had masks on their faces. Before entering, they had fired an intense electromagnetic pulse at the camera and had followed it up with a laser blast. They landed softly on the ground. No alarms sounded, no feet pounded. It looked like the camera was disabled. They went to the rear of the building to a door, where Bwana produced a toolkit and jimmied it open. The door opened into a narrow hallway and was dark. They turned on their NVGs and checked out the rooms on either side of the hallway. Store, kitchen, an empty office. They stilled when they heard the sound of murmuring. Upstairs, Bwana pointed. They went to the front. No reception area, not that kind of office. Just a large room that the front door opened into. There was a wall-mounted bell beneath which was a plastic car. Ring for attention. Roger's finger hovered over the button, and he winked when Bwana glared at him. They went up concrete stairs to where the murmuring came from. The steps ended at another hallway which had more rooms branching out. 2 of them were brightly lit. The murmuring came from one room, and from the other, one of them, a middle-aged man, emerged. He stood stock-still at the sight of the intruders. Then he yelled and grabbed at his waist. Bwana shot him in the shoulder, and Roger raced towards him, chopped him with his gun barrel, and cuffed him. Less than 10 seconds to disable him. From the first room, chairs scraped and startled voices called out. 2 men ran out, right into Bwana's fists. They too were trussed up. A pimply-faced man turned terrified eyes in their direction. He was seated at a large screen on which a video was playing. "Who are you?" he stuttered. "There's no money in this office. It's just an editing office." Bwana waited for Roger to check the rest of the building, and when his friend returned and gave the clear sign, he dropped in a chair. Show us those videos. The man licked his lips nervously. There's nothing to see. They are ads for companies. I like ads. Let's see them. Who are you? Do you know who owns this building? Pimply Face grew bolder when he realized his intruders weren't out to kill him. Bwana didn't reply. He drew out a foot-long knife from a thigh sheath and placed it on the table. Pimply Face's eyes darted to it, and he swallowed. I won't kill you, Bwana told him reassuringly, but I will hurt you. 2 hours later, they had watched several videos, with no change in their expression. Inwardly, they were raging. They recognized several of the movie stars in the scenes. None of those scenes had played at cinemas. They were right off the editing floor. Pimply Face had spilled everything he knew. He talked of studio workers they bribed, who stole the scenes. Sometimes the workers were Trevisani employees. I think there's blackmail involved too, he confessed. The gang contacts the stars and asks them to pay up or else the videos get released. A lot of them do, but the gang still releases the scenes. Who runs that operation? The blackmail? It's not out of here. We just send the clips to various hosting sites from here. There weren't just movie clips. There were extreme porn videos too, several of them. I just follow orders, Pimply Face said nervously when he felt their thick silence. Where are the backups? Roger snarled. Pimply Face gave them 2 addresses where the backup servers were located. Both were residences, houses, one in Culver City and another in Compton. Any more? There are more such operations. Pimply Face gave them more addresses. He reluctantly deleted all the videos and moaned when Roger destroyed the computers and ripped out the cables. Bwana smashed all the phones in the building and destroyed their cells. He glanced at his watch. 4:30 a.m. Still time to take out the 2 backup sites. They knocked out Pimply Face and left for Compton. They were having breakfast in their hotel after having dropped Shannon at his school when Danny Trevisani steamed in. He had 3 men with him, new faces to Bwana and Roger. The hoods were hard-looking and stood watching carefully, their hands close to the holsters beneath their jackets. The breakfast room was sparsely populated, an elderly couple in a far corner and a suit reading his newspaper several tables away. Where were you last night? Trevisani spat, his eyes glittering with rage. Roger took his time, chewing on a slice of ham, before answering, Why, Danny boy? What business is it of yours? Where were you? Trevisani hissed, louder. In our rooms. Fast asleep. You have men watching us, don't you? That black SUV in the parking lot. That has your men in it. They didn't tell you? They had spotted the watchers the evening of their agreement with Trevisani. The SUV stuck to them wherever they went and stayed in the hotel at night. Megan had made calls when Bwana had outlined their demonstration to her, and in the evening, 2 men had entered the hotel discreetly. One was blonde and handsome, while the other was tall, broad, and dark. Both men could pass as doubles for Roger and Bwana if no one was looking closely. The 2 operatives were counting on the watchers, not paying too much attention. The agency men were sticking to a routine, and their shadows would be bored as they kept watch. They wouldn't spot the replacements, and the 2 shadows slinking out of the hotel later in the night. Don't believe us? Bwana wiped his lips with a napkin. Check out the hotel's security cameras. They will prove what we said. What happened last night, Danny boy? Roger asked innocently. Danny Trevisani glowered at them and looked around to see if he had an audience. He had. The room had started filling up, and people were eyeing them curiously. The mobster crooked a finger at the operatives, muttered a curse, and spun on his heels and walked out. That was close. Bwana dug into a large portion of bacon. Huh? I thought we would have to get physical. If it had, this breakfast spread would have been on the floor. Wasted. Is that all you think of? Food? I am large and still growing, Bwana defended himself. I need lots of nourishment. Roger looked heavenwards, rolling his eyes, and finished his meal in silence. He won't give up, he said after a while. Yeah, we need to emphasize our message. The Lucky Pig was an unlikely name for an Italian fine dining experience. The restaurant was on Rodeo Drive, nestled between upscale boutiques and fashion stores. It had a waiting list that ran for several months, and Joe Public had little chance of dining in it. The restaurant usually had a gaggle of spectators and bystanders at night time who hung around to catch a glimpse of movie stars. Not many knew it, but the restaurant was owned by the Trevisani family. Giovanni Trevisani was in the restaurant each night, supervising it, greeting its patrons by name. That night was no different, and he was making his rounds at the tables when an immaculately dressed server whispered in his ear. Giovanni continued smiling and shaking hands, no change of expression on his face. He was silver-haired and his face was wrinkled. He looked like a genial uncle when he smiled, which was only when he was with customers. He usually had a stern, forbidding expression on his face, which sent the shivers up the spines of those in his gang. Giovanni made his excuses and went to the rear of the restaurant, pushed open the door to his office, and stopped at the scene in front of him. There were 4 hoods in the room, lined against the wall, their arms crossed, watching impassively. Danny Trevisani was in the center of the room, 3 men in front of him. He was showering spittle on 2 of them, swearing and cursing as he slapped them. The 2 men were the watchers at the Beverly Hills hide. "They escaped from the hotel," he raged, and punched one man in the face. "The 2 men you were watching were dummies. Fake. No other explanation for those masked men at the Wilmington studio." He kicked out, lashing at the other man's groin. He whirled suddenly, grabbing the 3rd man, a terrified, pimply face. "Why did you delete everything? Don't you know how important it was?" Pimply Face covered his face with his arms as Danny Trevisani hit him. "They would have killed me, boss. I could see it in their eyes." "Now, I will kill you," Danny Trevisani yelled and grabbed at his gun. "Enough," Giovanni thundered. "Let them go." "But—" "Let them go," Giovanni whispered. Danny nodded sullenly and gestured at the 3 men who fled from the room. The door shut behind them, but before Giovanni could talk, it burst open and Bwana and Roger sauntered in. "Danny boy," Roger smiled widely, "you missed us." "Get them!" Danny Trevisani screamed, his face red. The 4 hoods sprang into action, their hands reaching under their jackets. Danny threw himself at his father and brought him down, out of the line of fire. Bwana and Roger spread out, brought their hands from behind, revealing their Glocks. They fired as one, way before the gangsters' guns had cleared. Single and double taps in shoulders and chests, surprise and speed catching everyone unaware. One hood got a shot back, but it struck the ceiling. Roger swarmed forward closer and smashed one of the shooters unconscious. 2 had fallen. The 3rd was sliding down the wall, clutching his chest. Bwana covered his friend, keeping an eye on the Trevisanis. He heard rushing footsteps at the door, and before it swung open, he grabbed Giovanni Trevisani and pointed his gun at him. 4 more hitters came inside the room, their guns drawn. "Leave," he commanded, "or your boss dies." The hitters looked at him and at the fallen men in the room. "Go," Giovanni choked out. "It will be okay." The men left, backing out slowly. Bwana shoved the Mafia head in a chair, while Roger grabbed his son and backed him against the ornate desk in the room. Roger holstered his Glock and sighed dramatically. "We just came to talk." Chapter 8. "Here's the problem," Roger mused as he paced in front of the gangsters. "It's your problem," he pointed at Danny Trevisani, "not ours. You think you can take us out? You are the son of a Mafia boss. You have men at your command. You think you own this city. But did you see how easily we destroyed your studio? That was us, just so you know. And here's our deal. You swallow your pride. You stick to your agreement. Back off from Fraser and his son. Stay away from us. Forever. He waited for a response from Danny, who stayed silent, stony-faced. He won't. Look at him. He thinks he can crush us, Bwana argued. You need to remind him. Oh, yes, that, Roger said apologetically. I forgot. You got a couple more studios in Culver City and Compton. Why don't you check on them? Call them. Go on, he urged when father and son exchanged a look. Just don't call for backup or reinforcements. You'll be dead before they get here. Danny brought out his phone and dialed the first number. What? When? He yelled when someone answered. He hung up abruptly, called the second studio, and turned grey when his call was answered. What happened? His father asked. They are gone. Both of them, Danny replied, dully. There was a fire 15 minutes back. What we were saying, Roger chimed in brightly, we can and will strike when you are least expecting it. We know what you're thinking. You'll make your move after we've gone. But here's the thing. We'll come back when you are least expecting it. And the next time, we act. He shook his head sadly. You'll not live through it, Danny boy. And if that isn't enough, you've got a house in Malibu, right, Danny boy? Swimming pool, 10 bedrooms, your mistress in 1 bedroom. You'd better hurry if you care for her. It will. Danny Trevisani ran out of the room with a strangled shriek. Boys, so impatient, Roger said mournfully, looking at Giovanni Trevisani. I was saying the house will blow up in 1 hour. There's enough time for him to get there and save anyone. The Mafia boss had a curious expression in his eyes, as if he was seeing the 2 operatives in a new light. You are only 2 men. Ah, Roger nodded approvingly. You are wiser. I was wondering if you would bring it up. Yeah, you might get us, but we have friends. And it's better you don't get us because you don't want our friends hunting for you. No, sir, they'll burn your gang down and destroy it in front of your eyes. Who are you? We are just 2 heavies, Roger chuckled, protecting Fraser and his son. Why? What's he to you? He's a depressed man. He tried to take his life once. He'll probably try again. What's so important about him? We gave our word to his son, and if you don't control your son, you'll lose him. Giovanni Trevisani pondered for a moment and then nodded. You have my word? He smiled faintly. Can I tempt you into joining us? No, sir. Very well. The West Coast Mafia will not trouble you anymore. Tell Fraser he has nothing to worry from us if he keeps his end of the deal and does not go to the cops. What do you know of the explosions? Jeffrey Hall yelled at Roger and Bwana over a video call later in the day. What explosions? Roger asked in surprise. Don't do that. Hall waved a thick finger in warning. Do what? Roger feigned an injured tone. Don't act innocent. Danny Trevisani's house was destroyed in an explosion. My people say it was no accident. Some kind of explosive that's not readily available. Was anyone killed or injured? No? Not us, Chief, Roger replied. Why would we destroy his house? Maybe he's done it himself to claim insurance. You know how these Mafia dudes are. They will do anything to make an illegal buck. Hall scowled at them. Don't tell me how to do my job. Where were the 2 of you earlier? Dining at the Lucky Pig. His scowl grew deeper. How did the 2 of you get a table? Declan Fraser reserved one for us, Roger replied cheerfully. I'm sure he can make a reservation for you, Chief. Mrs. Hall would love it. Hall ended the call abruptly. I think he's furious with us. I can't figure out why, Roger told his companion, who was stretched out on a couch in his hotel room. Neither can I. You're just being you, cheerful and funny. Who wouldn't like you? Danny Trevisani kept away from them. He still had his men follow Bwana and Roger, but he didn't come to the studio, and neither did he show up at the hotel. There was only a week's worth of shooting left, and the operatives sensed Fraser, Miranda, and Mankins wanted to finish it as quickly and professionally as they could. The agency men took Shannon a couple of times to watch the shoot. At no time were they troubled by the Trevisani gang. "One more day," Declan Fraser told them late one evening as he washed his face in his changing room. "Then we're going to the editing floor, and Jennifer and I select the scenes that need to come out. The evening after, we're having a party. You should come." "We were thinking of leaving once your editing round is done," Bwana demurred. "No way. You should attend the party. Shannon insists on it. Besides," he smiled slyly, "you might get spotted by a Hollywood director. You just might get those parts Rob mentioned." He laughed when Bwana grimaced and clapped him on the shoulder. "You're coming. No arguments. You can leave the day after the party." Bwana and Roger didn't enter the editing room. They waited outside while Mankins, the two actors, and a few select crew members closeted themselves inside. It was evening, and outside, the setting sun had painted the sky orange. Bwana observed his friend watch the night sky through a window. "Time to go home." "Yeah," Roger replied, without turning around. Los Angeles was good. Hollywood was great. Their time with A-listers was fabulous, but nothing beat New York. It didn't have the wide skies of L.A. It didn't have Hollywood, but it was their city. "One more day," Bwana promised, and Roger gave him a thumbs up. Chapter 9. The party was at the Beverly Hills Wilshire in a ballroom. Mankins and Fraser had pulled out all the stops in arranging it. They had screened the movie, which was still to go through its editing rounds, to a select audience of powerful distributors, a few A-listers, and reputable critics. All had received the movie well and talked of the second coming of Declan Fraser. Jennifer Miranda was one to watch, they agreed. As for Trevor Mankins, it would be a travesty if he didn't win any awards. Bwana and Roger kept to themselves, watching elegantly dressed men and women exchange air kisses and mingle. The actors in the room and their agents were among the most powerful in the industry. Jane and Joe Public would have felt lightheaded to be in the same room as them. Bwana felt nothing, and he knew his friend felt the same. They had been in the killing fields of the world. They had seen death, up close and personal, several times. The make-believe universe of the movie industry held no appeal to them. "You are..." An actor, the star of a recent blockbuster hit, regarded them over her wine glass, her well-shaped brows furrowed as she tried to place them. "We're with Fraser, ma'am," Roger smiled. "His co-stars?" "No, ma'am. We're just Heavies. His protection detail." She recovered fast and slipped away gracefully. Bwana and Roger exchanged a glance and shrugged their shoulders. In the movie business, Heavies were insignificant. "Enjoying yourselves?" Fraser came to them and handed them a glass each. "Guess not." He smiled when he saw their expressions. He stood with them for a while and watched his guests. "You should know something," he said finally, his eyes still on the party. "Hall insisted I tell you, but I was paranoid and kept it to myself. Got him to promise not to say anything to you. I made a mistake there, but it's done." He turned to face the operatives. I had been wearing a wire all along, a bug. It recorded every conversation I had with Danny Trevisani, every threat. There's one video of his slapping Shannon. It collected enough evidence to put Danny Boy away for a long time, maybe even his dad. "You didn't think of telling us." Bwana's voice was flat, his face cold, after they had digested the revelation. "I did." Fraser shifted uncomfortably. "Hall threatened to tell you, but I told him I would throw away the wire if he did." "Why?" "We would have done some things differently if we had known." "Fear," Fraser admitted. Both of you had excellent credentials. Hall knew you personally. Still, I wasn't ready to trust anyone. I didn't tell Mankins or Miranda either. You're still wearing it? You're recording us? Nope. I surrendered it to Kaminsky earlier today. He's with... We know him. You have to understand, the actor pleaded. We do, Bwana retorted, no give in him. Mr. Fraser, why did you hire us? Roger asked him. If the LAPD was listening onto everything, they would have protected you. Appearances, the actor said shamefacedly. It would look strange if I didn't arrange for private protection. Danny Trevisani would have sensed something was off. We were perfect for the part, weren't we? Declan Fraser didn't meet their eyes. Did Shannon know? The actor flushed deeply. No, oh God, no, he's seeking you out. That wasn't an act. We'll leave when this is over. Bwana flicked his eyes over the crowd. Tonight, please let Shannon know we liked being with him. Fraser did his best to persuade them to stay. He apologized profusely and offered to pay them handsomely. An offer he retracted instantly when he saw the operatives' stony faces. He shrugged in helplessness when his pleas didn't work, put on his actor's mask, and went to join his guests. Bwana and Roger hung around, not speaking, barely acknowledging the occasional glances that came their way. The actress who had greeted them looked over at them curiously a time or two, but she made no move to come onto them. It was as if they gave off a dangerous vibe. They didn't feel anger or rage. They felt empty. They didn't like being played, and that Declan Fraser hadn't trusted them, hurt. The party wound down at 2 a.m., and after pasting a smile on their faces, they shook hands with Mankins and Miranda, nodded in Fraser's direction, and walked out of the hotel. Their gear was in the Mustang, which Roger drove a couple of blocks away. They switched their bags to a rental car, and Roger handed the Mustang's keys to a bleary-eyed shipping agent at whose office they had parked. The agent would transport Roger's vehicle to New York while they caught their flight. Bwana took the wheel of the rented vehicle and swung out just as Roger's phone rang. Fraser told me, Chief of Police Jeffrey Hall began without any greeting. It wasn't my idea, but I couldn't override him. He gave us an ultimatum, and for us, getting the Trevisanis was important. More important than your feelings. Hall made no attempt to sugarcoat anything. Yeah, it's not you, Bwana replied, and he meant it. Hall was a friend. They understood his situation. Hall wasn't the one they were disappointed in. Disappointed? He examined his feelings for a moment. Yeah, that was right. He wasn't furious with Fraser, just disappointed that the actor hadn't trusted them more. He looked at Roger, who was staring straight ahead, and instinctively knew his friend felt the same. You got good stuff? He asked Hall. I haven't listened to it yet. Kaminsky's the lead, and he says we have gold dust. They talked for a few more minutes, and silence fell on them when Bwana hung up. He drove on Overland Avenue and was cutting left to Vicksburg Avenue when a thought struck him. Megan, he said slowly, thinking furiously. When we spoke to her today, she said there was no mention of Fraser's depression. Nothing in the news, in the gossip magazines, nothing put out by his agent. Yeah, Roger glanced at him curiously. So? Bwana locked eyes with his friend as they tried to work out what that meant. Kaminsky! Roger breathed. Bwana swung the wheel hard, performing an illegal turn, nearly swiping a cab that honked irately. He tossed his phone to Roger, who tried Hall's number. Busy. Try Fraser. Voicemail. Bwana rocketed down Vicksburg Avenue, while Roger tried various numbers and threw the cell down in disgust. Bwana turned at Sepulveda and joined San Diego Freeway, heading north. He raced down the fast lane till Roger touched his shoulder. Cops might stop us. So? Bwana yelled, angry that neither he nor his friend had spotted the Kaminsky connection. Because now it was so obvious. Kaminsky was Trevisani's cop. There was no other way the Trevisanis would have known of the depression. And Kaminsky had Fraser's recordings. So some of them might tell Kaminsky, Roger replied, and that made Bwana stomp on the gas even harder instead. He slowed as they reached the hills. He cut off his lights when they approached Fraser's house and coasted to a stop. The gates were shut, and the house was dark. They opened their duffel bags swiftly and geared themselves up. NVGs, Glock, spare mags, flashbangs, the works. They didn't know what they were heading into, and it never hurt to be prepared. They vaulted lightly over the walls and found the first sign that something was off. No security guards around, no one to challenge them, no audible alarms. They crouched low and raced across the wide lawn and skirted the swimming pool, entered the porch without facing any opposition. The house was still dark and silent, no movement from inside. There were large glass windows that faced the front garden. Those were curtained off. Roger tried a window, while Bwana tried the wide entrance door. It swung open silently, and he beckoned at Roger. It could be a trap. The two exchanged thoughts silently. It didn't seem to be a trap. Glocks held high and ready, they entered the enormous lounge. Dark, no movement. They turned on their NVGs. They moved deeper, Roger heading to the stairs when the lights turned on. Kaminsky, flanked by 4 hoods, coming from behind them. It looked like they had been hiding behind the floor-to-ceiling curtains. I had cops at the airport. They reported you hadn't showed up. I knew you would come here. Chapter 10. Kaminsky had a gun pointed at them, as did the 4 hoods. They were watchful and had their fingers on the triggers. Roger looked upwards towards the bedrooms, at the sounds of a struggle. That's Danny. He's going to smother Fraser, make it look like it's natural. Then he'll plant a gun in his hand, fire it at Shannon. He'll fire 1 round in Declan's temple. It will look like the actor killed his son and then himself. News will leak that he suffered from depression and had attempted suicide before. You knew of the wire all along. Why didn't you do something about it? Roger asked, his mind racing, trying to find a way out. Danny wanted to see what the actor would do, what you dudes would do. The recordings weren't going anywhere. They were with me. There was nothing Fraser could do to threaten us. Roger felt Bwana bunching up and knew instinctively what he planned to do. No. He didn't know if he yelled out loud. It didn't matter. Bwana drew in a flash, threw himself at them, firing at the bunched figures in front of them, roaring, "Go!" Bwana's bullets cut down the gangsters. They ripped into Kaminsky, but Bwana got hit too. He staggered, and then he was falling on the cop and the gangsters. Roger didn't stay to watch. A strange emptiness filled him as he flew to the stairs, forcing himself to look away from the sight of his fallen friend. 2 hitters came to the top of the stairs. He chopped them down, firing from his hip. No emotion, no rage, no feeling. Nothing. There was an obstruction in his way. He had to remove it. 2 at a time, he ran up the stairs, his eyes seeking, searching. Movement from behind the banisters at the landing. He fired again, going for the legs, and he heard shrieks of agony. 2 double taps at the 2 bodies on the landing, moving quickly towards the room of the struggle. Another hitter peering around its door. Roger shot him through the forehead, but not before the shooter returned fire, and a round plucked at his sleeve. No injury, no wound. Just feeling cold and intense. He tossed grenades far ahead and dropped to the floor as they exploded. The explosives would subdue any shooters in the other rooms. He crawled swiftly and poked his head around the bedroom's door, drew it back swiftly, assessed what he had seen. Fraser on a large bed. Arms and legs tied. Danny Trevisani leaning over him, facing the door. A hitter behind Trevisani. Shannon tied to a chair. He'll have more shooters. He changed mags on his Glock as he worked out his options. Drop your gun and come inside, or I will kill Fraser and his kid right away, Danny Trevisani called out from inside. If I go in guns blazing, I will get killed, and I will not have helped Bwana in any way. Thoughts of his friend, the way he had leapt at his killers, made his mind up for him. I'm coming in, he shouted. Throw your gun, raise your hands and walk in slowly, Danny Trevisani ordered. Roger chucked his Glock inside and did as he was bade. He met Declan Fraser's terrified eyes and tried to look as reassuring as he could. But he was a captive, and he could see hope leaking out of the actor's eyes. Shannon seemed to have gone into shock, his eyes wide, his face white. He was rocking and moaning softly in his chair. I would have killed them in another few minutes. Danny Trevisani smiled cheerfully. There was a dark light in his eyes, something that leaped and danced in his pupils. A psychopath. This dude has gone off the rails. If I had 2 men like you, I would have ruled the world. Trevisani shook his head in admiration. How many did you kill? Where's your friend? Is he dead? At that, the emptiness in Roger filled with a burning rage. He dove at the Mafia boss with a wordless yell, and the next moment was on the floor when a blow knocked him to the ground. There was a rush of feet and hoods kicked at him and stamped on his face. Stop! The gang boss yelled. I want him alive so that he can see Fraser and his son die. Then I'll kill him. The beating let up. The hoods moved back. 3 of them, Roger noted dully, and Danny Trevisani. Search him. A hitter grabbed Roger by the collar and hauled him up. Another felt around his waist carefully and removed his spare mags. The Mafia man removed his knife, held it to the light, and tossed it to the floor. He brought out the grenades, and Danny Trevisani whistled softly. You came for war. Too bad. You ended up on the losing side. The shooter's hands went into one of Roger's thigh pockets and felt the round device inside. Careful with that, Roger gasped hoarsely. What is it? The mobster muttered to himself and drew it out. Another grenade lay in his palm. This one, with its pin out. Everyone froze in shock. All eyes stared at the deadly weapon. And then Roger acted. He whipped his hand towards the back of his neck, drew out his hideaway Glock that the mobster hadn't discovered yet. Drew faster than he had ever before. A yell. Bodies fell away, more angered shouting when the hoods realized the grenade was fake. Guns straightened. Roger fired. One long, rolling thunder directly at the 2 men in front of him. He felt something hit him in the back, something that felt like a tree trunk, slamming into him. He fell, rolled away, and propped himself on his right shoulder. Another blow on his chest. Ignore. He fired at the shooter behind Trevisani. Watched the red blossom on his chest. Turned his attention to the gang boss who was diving away and reaching for his gun. He snapped a shot which burned Trevisani. The Mafia chief yowled in agony, but he kept darting away and drawing his gun. A fast reload and Roger fired again just as a mule kicked him in the abdomen. It was another round striking his armored vest. Trevisani was on his knees, gasping loudly, blood staining his chest, turning his white shirt dark. He raised his gun at Roger again. Footsteps behind Roger. Get Trevisani. Once he's out of the picture, his hoods will disappear. Shannon and Declan will be safe. I will die. So what? Bwana's already dead. Roger steadied himself, propping himself on his right elbow, switching his gun to his left hand. There were shouts from behind him, outside the room. He blanked them out. He tasted blood on his tongue and felt mild surprise. He seemed to have taken a round somewhere on his forehead. He had no recollection of its striking. Trevisani's gun straightened. His face was twisted, his eyes burned. Roger willed himself to make his shots count. He sighted down his barrel, lifted it to go for a headshot. The two men fired almost simultaneously, and something smashed into Roger's side. "I got him," he thought in satisfaction as Trevisani fell back. He heard more confused shouting and a roll of thunder. He turned desperately to face his attackers when something struck him in the back. He slipped into darkness. He woke to something soft against his face. He lay still for a moment and figured it was a pillow. "Heaven will have pillows, doofus," he thought to himself, and prepared to go back to sleep, when another thought struck him. "Heaven? Since when did I get a ticket to that place? I should be in the other one." His eyes flicked open. White bed. He turned on his back, and his breath caught at the sight of the large black man regarding him with concern. "Neither of us are in hell," Bwana declared, masking his anxious expression quickly. "You're still saddled with me, buddy." Roger blinked and straightened slowly. He looked down at himself. There were strappings across his chest. His neck felt stiff, and his temple felt like someone was swinging a jackhammer at it. "You took a few rounds. Looks like your armor was faulty. Luckily, no vitals were hit." "How?" Roger croaked and gulped from the glass of water that Bwana held to his mouth. "How did you survive?" he asked his friend as he lay down on the bed. "I thought you were gone. You took all the rounds plumb on your body." "That I did," Bwana chuckled deeply. "My body still hurts. But those dumbasses fired at my chest, at my armor, which held up. It'll take more than a crooked cop and 4 hoods to down me." His belly laugh filled the room. 2 days later, they headed back to Los Angeles Airport again, this time driven by Chief of Police Jeffrey Hall. Kaminsky was dead. The hoods Bwana had fallen on were dead. Most of the gangsters from that night were dead. Giovanni Trevisani was under arrest. He wasn't directly implicated in the recordings, but there was enough in it that the prosecutors felt confident. In any case, the head of the West Coast Mafia seemed to be a beaten man. He had aged a decade in just 2 days. He had surrendered willingly to the cops and was now in custody. Declan Fraser had no words to express his gratitude, and he didn't even try. Shannon did more than enough talking and eyed the two men like heroes, which they were to him. Even Webb, Fraser's agent, was impressed when the shootout splashed on the media's pages and TV screens. "Stick around," he urged. "I can get you lead roles. You can write your own tickets." "I think you'd better go, Rob." Shannon curled his lips, and the agent slunk away. Hall had exploded in rage when he had heard of Kaminsky's involvement. After assuring himself that his friends were alive, he had started an investigation in his department to root out any other dirty cops. Hall helped Bwana and Roger with their few bags and walked with them inside the airport's terminal. He clasped their hands tight and slapped them on their shoulders. "You came on vacation," he grinned wickedly, and closed down the Mafia. "Stay a while longer. There are some Russian gangs I want to get rid of." His laugh boomed out and carried them home. The end.